What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, guys, today we're going to get into the excellent 50-45 performance that Petr Yan put on against Deiveson Figueiredo at UFC Macau this past weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about what's next for Petr Yan. You know, he did call out the champion, Merab. He wants that rematch. Merab potentially has some business with Umar Nurmagomedov. There's Sugar Sean O'Malley, but he tweeted, hey, if you want it, let's get it done. So we'll see what happens. We're going to discuss what's next for Merab and if Petr Yan did kind of shuffle himself to the top of the deck. We're also going to get into a little Conor McGregor. You know, he's had some trouble outside of the octagon lately. He's gone back and forth with the likes of Khabib and Islam Makhachev on Twitter. And we're going to talk about if the troubles that Conor is experiencing are making him more or less likely to actually make a UFC return. And then ultimately, we're going to talk about and break down a great matchup that got announced, which is Jamahal versus Jiří Procházka at the first UFC pay-per-view of 2025. That's going to be UFC 311. So, Nick, without further ado, let's get right into Petr Yan versus Figgy.
Yeah.
This was a really fun fight, and it was good to see Peter come back and have a performance like this. Deiveson is a very formidable opponent. He was for years at 125, but he's also proven over the last couple of performances at bantamweight that he can hang with the guys in the next division up as well. In fact, his durability is really good. He made it all the way to number 5 in the division before suffering the setback last night. To me, the real X factor here was the dynamic striking shot selection of Peter, as well as the volume. You know, Deiveson Figueiredo is not the most volume-heavy striker. He's very powerful, and he's put people's lights out at 125, and he can do that at bantamweight as well. However, if it comes to decision, he has a hard time, as he did last night, getting his hand raised because the volume's just not there. And I don't think he really had much answer for what Yan was bringing last night. Yan was throwing some really nice Thai-style combos, good straight punches followed by kicks to the head, good kicks to the body, some absolutely beautiful trips that he utilized to get Deiveson to the ground a couple times. And as I said, 50-45 on all three judges' scorecards. What do you make of Yan's performance?
I love the fight, and here's the thing. Deiveson Figueiredo at 135 is a lot of fun. You know, we have a former champion that moves up a division, and you always wonder if size is going to be a factor when you have a guy like that. And Deiveson Figueiredo has proven not only can he strike just as powerfully as a lot of these 35ers, but he's very durable. He's hard to get out of there. And yeah, you're right about the volume. He doesn't throw a ton of volume, and he starts the fights pretty strong, and that's where his biggest shots tend to land and do the most damage. And a lot of time he can get enough damage done early on to get some success later in the fight and even look for finishes. But when he doesn't have that success, he doesn't get the fight over with early, or he doesn't do the damage that he needs to do early on, he tends to bring the volume down significantly. He throws very random power shots that don't seem to have a lot of effectiveness, and they aren't set up with other strikes to disguise them. So I think that Deiveson Figueiredo, his best chances to win against Petr Yan were to win the fight early, because traditionally when you watch Petr Yan fight, he's not a slow starter, but he's a calculated starter. He likes to pick up on what they're doing, and he'll, you know, maybe not concede the first round totally, but he'll certainly get his measures and get his reads on his opponent before he really starts to show his cards a little bit. So I thought that if Figueiredo would have come out really hot and Petr Yan would have come out how we've seen him before, kind of calculated and a little bit more reserved, we could see an interesting early part of the fight in favor of Figueiredo. But Petr Yan seemed to start calculated as always, but he started faster, and he brought more offense and more pressure from early on, which made him able to mitigate Figueiredo's power shots and some of his pressure that he brings early in the fight. So I thought Petr Yan's game plan was really good, and it's so funny because about 2 or 3 years ago,
he was the man.
He was the man, and Figueiredo was the man, just in one weight class lower. They were both champions probably at the same time, and you know, the Sugar Sean O'Malley loss was tough. The illegal knee with Aljamain, and then he ended up losing his belt, but he got his belt so young. That belt changes hands so often in the bantamweight division that after a fight like that with a former champion, you know, like we always talk about all the time, former champions are hard to find in this sport, especially if you're a top-ranked opponent, because usually when they make it to the top, they have a pretty quick de-escalation down the rankings. But Petr Yan was able to get in there with another former champion. He had some good success, and you know, there's a lot of questions at bantamweight as to what's going to happen next for Merab. Merab is doing what all people want to see their champion do. He's taking on anybody that wants to fight him, and he's engaging and interacting with all the three big guys. The three-headed monster is Sugar Sean, Umar Nurmagomedov, and Petr Yan just inserted himself back in there. In my opinion, on merit, Umar deserves the shot at Merab. I think as far as the UFC and business is concerned, and what the fans would like to see and probably pay for more than any of them, is a Sugar Sean rematch, and that's only because Sugar's a big name. And then Petr Yan's probably the third likely to get the next title shot. So in my opinion, Merab Dvalishvili isn't going to just lose to Umar Nurmagomedov. I think that's a very winnable fight for both guys. It's a tougher fight than Petr Yan or Sugar for Merab, but it's the right thing to do, and Merab is not scared of anybody. So I think he should fight Umar next, and then maybe even on the same card, since everybody seems to be pretty healthy right now and looking forward to 2025, maybe put Sugar Sean and Petr Yan in for a rematch as the co-main event for the title fight. And we have basically a 4-man tournament, see how it all shakes out. A lot of people thought the Sugar Sean Petr Yan fight was controversial. The decision was up in the air. Nobody really knew who exactly won. A lot of people thought Petr won. So I'd like to see them maybe run that one back again. And then obviously whoever wins that fight gets the winner of Umar versus Merab. But yeah, Petr Yan looked as good as he's ever looked. And to say that about a former champion speaks volumes to how he's, handling his career post-championship.
Yeah, and he's one of those rare people. He's almost like a Max Holloway in the sense that he became a champion at a very young age. I think he was 27 or 28 years old when he actually became the undisputed champion.
Yeah.
And so I think he's just around 29, 30 years old now.
Yeah.
So he still has a lot of tread left on the tires. And putting on performances like he did against a former champion in Figgy last night really shows that Petr Yan's best days may still be in front of him.
For sure.
The issue that he has is it's really hard to get the belt at 135 right now when you have Merab Dvalishvili and you have Umar Nurmagomedov.
Yeah.
Now, him and Merab put on a really good fight. And if you look at the resume of people that Peter's fought and Peter's beaten, I would make the argument that it's actually a better resume than Umar's resume.
Yeah.
Now, how much of that can you blame on Umar? Not much. A lot of people don't want to fight him. So he ends up fighting a debuter in Bekzat Almakhan, and it's going to turn out that Bekzat is quite a good fighter, as you're going to see down the road. That was actually not as easy as it may have appeared. So I think, though, if you look at the merit, Peter's actually more deserving than Umar, but the fight has kind of been discussed by the UFC.
Yeah.
Dana White says that Umar's next. It looks like we have that date in March right before Ramadan because we know that Umar is going to take off after that and take a month and do Ramadan and before he even thinks about getting back to training and fighting again. So that seems to me like the dates and the matchups and all are kind of roughly made, and the UFC is not going to let us know 4 months out exactly what the fight's going to be, but I have a feeling that UFC 313 on March the 8th, I believe it is going to be Umar versus Merab for the belt.
Nice.
But Peter really did make an interesting case for himself last night, and then there's always Sugar Sean. But Sean just lost, and it wasn't nearly as convincing or close of a fight as I think even Peter had with Merab.
Right.
So I really like your suggestion of let's do a 4-man tournament on March the 8th, and let's settle this to see who's going to fight next. Let's see who's fighting now for the belt, and then who's fighting next for the belt. And I think you do Sean O'Malley versus Yan. If Sean really did beat him the first time, he should be able to beat him again. So let Peter have that chance to run it back, and then let Umar fight Merab, which is going to be a really high-level fight, which is honestly the highest skill level of a title fight that I think the UFC might be able to put together.
Certainly in the grappling realm.
Yeah, when you look at these guys and just all the different ways that fight could go, that one is so interesting to me. But the funny thing about Petr Yan is every time I see him fight and win, it immediately makes me want to see him get his rematches against the people he lost to. Aljamain Sterling, Sean O'Malley, Merab Dvalishvili. It's like, man, Peter, like a couple things here and there, the stars aligning a little bit. All those losses could have been wins.
And we're talking about the best bantamweight of all time.
Right, yeah.
Hands down.
Seriously. And, but that's not the case. And he's a contender, and he's the number 3 in the division. Likely will stay number 3, maybe bump up to number 2.
Yeah, hard to move up there.
Yeah, but I think I like the idea of the 4-man tournament. Let's let these guys get it on in March. Sean O'Malley's a star.
Yeah.
So he's going to bring numbers to the pay-per-view, which should, be Merab should be thankful and grateful for that, because if Sean's on the card and he's getting but Merab's the champion and he's getting pay-per-view points, then all the better for Merab,
right?
Because he's got a very tough opponent ahead of him and he might not be the champion afterwards. So make it a good night of business, make some money, and then of course try to win. Try to do everything you can to retain the belt. But if you don't, at least you had a nice payday with the help of Sugar Sean on the card.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to manage 135, the top 4 fighters for 2025. You got to do this tournament. You got to have, I think Petr Yan and Sugar should fight. And there's good incentive for both guys. Sugar already beat him, right? But Petr Yan feels like he won. So both of them want to get back in there and really settle this score. And if you're either guy with both of those different mentalities, you feel like you can go out there and do the same thing again. And I guess if the judges aren't going to screw you, then Petr Yan feels pretty good about his chances. And Sugar Sean feels like he outright won the fight. So he probably likes his chances. And to me, it just seems like the right move. I don't want to see a young guy like Sugar Sean just hold out and wait for a title. Sure, he could do that, and by late 2025, we could see him just, maybe wait for Merab to defend against Umar, and then wait to defend against Yan, and then see who has the belt, and then just insert himself. Yeah. He's a big enough star to where he could do that. I don't think he wants to do that, and I don't think the UFC wants their young star to do that, because there's a little bit of an age limit or a window to the Sugar Sean show, right? I don't know if people are going to be as into the Sugar show when he's 40 years old with the face tattoos and the rainbow hair
definitely not. Yeah.
As he is at 30. So let's get him moving now. Let's keep him as the entertainer, who's also a lethal fighter, in with all these guys who are really good fighters, but maybe they can't draw the numbers that Sugar can. So I think Sugar should go. One side note I'll say that kind of contradicts what I just said is, we were talking about ring rust last week with the Stipe fight and everything. I don't mean to get sidetracked, but Sugar Sean's one of those guys that really takes every aspect of his camp, of his lifestyle, into very strict detail. And he really lives a cool life, a martial artist life. And I would love to see Sugar Sean be given an opportunity to have a year layover where he can just relax, heal his body, let himself relax. I don't want to see it, but I bet you a guy like Sugar Sean with a year off or 9 months off of fighting could come back and look even better than he's looked in the past.
Yeah, that's a solid point. And, he fought last in the Sphere, which was in September. So March would be just 6 months. So, I guess somewhat of a quick turnaround for Sugar. But I love the tournament idea. That makes sense. Yeah. You need to keep bantamweight moving. It's one of the most exciting divisions in the sport. And I love that. So I want to switch gears now and talk a little Conor McGregor.
Let's do it.
And I don't want to get too much into the whole lawsuit and the charges and what happened and all that, because quite frankly, here in the United States, we don't get all of the news out of Ireland. You just see the headlines that, that he's been ordered to pay a sum of money to, somebody that, he was suing him. So we'll leave it at that. But what I want to specifically talk about is the likelihood of Conor coming back and actually competing in the UFC, given everything that's going on in his personal life. Now, some parts of me say that Conor's more likely to come back now because of all these, setbacks that he's having. One, because, yes, Conor's a very rich man, but there's been people that were richer than Conor that went broke. Yeah. A lot of them, actually. That's true. Quite a few, and so to think that Conor, with his behavior, can't run out of money or can't get himself in a bind, it would be, wrongful thinking. Right. He absolutely can. So Conor, he also knows that the expiration date on when he's really honestly able to compete in the UFC
and would be relevant
is vastly reaching its end. Yeah. I think Conor's got 2 left if he ever comes back. Yeah. So I want to get your thoughts on whether or not you think all of these setbacks make it more or less likely for Conor to actually come back and compete in the UFC. And then I want to get into a little bit about the back and forth between him and Makhachev and Khabib, because I believe there's something there, and I'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, and that's going to be fun. But, Conor McGregor, he's always got something going on outside of the octagon. A lot of it's really positive. He's got really successful brands and all sorts of different industries, and he's doing a lot of good things. He's a busy man. So I can see where fighting and training for a fight, which is a full-time job, could sort of slip off with his injuries and his other business and stuff. But I do believe Conor wants to fight again. I do believe that he still thinks he can compete with the guys. Maybe not the world champions, but the guys in the UFC. And obviously he's the biggest star, so the UFC will put Conor McGregor back in the fight in an octagon soon. I think they're just waiting for some dust to settle. And this type of stuff is the really negative out of the octagon stuff that we don't like to see. And, you know, there's all sorts of conspiracies. Conor McGregor, I'm just going to say, is massive here in America. He is massive. People's grandmothers know who don't know who the UFC is. Their grandmother knows who Conor McGregor is. I can only imagine how famous and big he is of a figure in Ireland. I bet it's insane. And people have sort of hinted at the fact that he might want to get into politics. And there's some people that are saying that these are, allegations and things like that. And I don't know anything about them, so I'm not going to say whether they're false or true or whatever. I'm going to let the judges in the courts over there decide all of that.
That's not what we do on this channel.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we could see a potential time in our lives where a guy like Conor McGregor becomes a politician. And I think these sorts of things would really tarnish his name moving forward in a political career. So who knows exactly what the truth is in this whole situation. I feel bad for his children. I feel bad for his wife, Dee Devlin, who seems to be going through it, whether they're real or not.
The look on her face walking out of that courtroom said
it said a million. It said a million words.
They say pictures speak 1,000 words. That was a million-word picture there.
And now maybe this will light a fire under Conor to get a little bit more strict with his lifestyle, get back into training. When you dedicate your life to martial arts, you really do forego a lot of the fun aspects of life, the partying. You can't party most nights unless you're John Jones and then wake up and go train the next day. It just doesn't work that way. You have to dedicate your life. You have to eat right. You have to sleep right. All that sort of stuff. And I think Conor McGregor, with this sort of stuff, he does seem to get out of the limelight every now and again and sort of hunker down. I think maybe we'll see him do that and get himself ready for a fight in 2025. And then when you talk about what's next for him, I think we were talking about it. Michael Chandler should still get the opportunity. He went out and fought. He gave a very entertaining fight with Charles Oliveira. And I don't think he should be robbed of the Conor McGregor fight. I still think it's the best fight they can make for Conor McGregor at 155. I like it better than the Dan the Hangman Hooker one. But either one of those would be a lot of fun. But Chandler did what he needs to do. I think they should let Conor and Chandler fight each other maybe sometime next year. And then when you have the champion of your division, who wants nothing to do with you, apparently, is calling you out on Twitter and saying things, and his coach, who is Khabib, who also has a lot of history with Conor, is saying things at him. That makes me believe, if I'm looking at fighting as a sport, which is entertainment, and this is all a promotional thing, if Conor McGregor were to be taking shots like that at somebody on Twitter, everybody would go, oh, he's drumming up business for a fight. I don't know if Khabib and Islam are drumming up business for a fight with Conor, but I will tell you this. They wouldn't turn down a fight with Conor because they know that's an easy win for them. And I think, we're talking about Conor McGregor's the biggest star in the sport, and I don't see anybody for the next 50 years coming and touching the numbers that he does, because he's just such an anomaly, and he came in at the perfect time when the sport was emerging, and all sorts of stuff happened for Conor McGregor. So if you're a business, which the UFC is, you have to look at how to make money. And Conor McGregor is the best way for the UFC to make money. They know that he's got 1 or 2 fights left. And the biggest fight that they ever had was him versus Khabib. They can't remake that fight. Khabib doesn't fight anymore. It wouldn't make any sense. Conor McGregor versus Islam Makhachev is the closest thing you can get to Conor versus Khabib. And I know Conor doesn't deserve a title shot against a guy like Islam right now. But we did just see a 42-year-old Stipe Miocic, after 4 years off, coming off a loss, get to fight for a title. So, and he's nowhere near the star that Conor McGregor is. So if you are telling me that this guy, Stipe Miocic, can get a rematch after 4 years, I think with a reasonable, about the same amount of layover for Conor and not winning his last couple fights, the UFC would still put him in a title fight just for that one big night of business. You get it over with. People are going to be upset. Oh, he didn't win his last few fights and all that stuff. But you have to understand, the UFC is a business, and they know that they have their biggest star. They only have a couple more fights. If he goes out there and gets beat by a Dan the Hangman Hooker, he might not come back for another one. Right. So you put him in a title fight, then he fights. He probably doesn't get his hand raised against Islam. And then he has one more fight, a really fun one, maybe a BMF or another fun fight for him. And then he moves on to the next chapter of his life. So I think that's the way they should look at it. I think Conor should probably fight Chandler next year. And then if they're going to make something happen with him, maybe make it happen for the title.
Yeah, don't think for 1 second that the UFC won't make Islam Makhachev versus Conor McGregor if Conor can come back and get a win. So let's look at the real numbers, because we talk about Conor being the biggest star in the sport's history, and that is undeniable. He is absolutely that. But his biggest night of business by far was him versus Khabib.
Right.
The rivalry there is still live. And if the tweets over the past couple of days haven't told that story, then you probably just haven't been paying attention.
Right.
Khabib versus Conor did 2.4 million pay-per-view buys. The number 2 night of business in the entirety of the UFC's history is Diaz versus McGregor 2, and that was at 1.6 million pay-per-view buys. So I want to context this a little bit. That's an 800,000 pay-per-view buy difference. And
which is huge.
Yeah. And Nate Diaz is a big star.
Right.
And so Conor McGregor is the common denominator on both of those fights.
Right.
Now, an average night of business for a UFC pay-per-view might be 300,000 or 400,000 pay-per-view buys.
For instance, Sugar Sean versus Aljo was 350.
There you go. So we're talking about double the average of a normal UFC card, just in the difference between Conor's number 1 and Conor's number 2.
Right.
And what's the differentiator? The opponent. It was Khabib. I say all that to say that Conor McGregor versus Islam Makhachev is the biggest fight that the UFC could make with who they currently have on their roster. Now, we can get into whether or not it's fair. And
he doesn't deserve it.
I'm a purist. Conor McGregor in no way, shape, or form deserves to fight Islam Makhachev.
Right.
But when has that ever made any difference to anybody? Ask Tom Aspinall how deserving Stipe Miocic was. Khalil Roundtree, love Khalil, no disrespect to Khalil, but he was like number 8 or number 9 when he was given the opportunity to fight Pereira. We've got a freaking guy making his debut in the UFC,
at 125,
fighting for a belt at 125 in a couple of weeks. I mean, to think that the UFC won't make a matchup because somebody hasn't earned it on merit would be an incorrect line of thinking.
Right.
Conor versus... Now, what I think they're going to do is they're going to let him come back and fight Michael Chandler, maybe a Tony Ferguson, whatever. And then Islam Makhachev is going to handle his business, potentially handle his business with Arman Sarukian. He's the favorite there. Most people think he's going to win. Charles would probably be next after that. If he beats Charles again, like, who's next?
Right.
Seriously, like at 155, who's next? Because without a move up to 170, there's nobody. I mean, what are you going to see if Matus Gamrot can get back on a winning streak? You're going to see if maybe Justin Gaethje can string a couple wins together, or
Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah, there's nothing left for Islam at 155. And if Shavkat or Bilal is the champion at 170, we'll see what his appetite is for that. But the UFC, time and time again, has made big stars off of exiting megastars. And Islam right now is a big star. He's not a megastar.
Right.
Islam Makhachev would walk through Conor McGregor.
Easily.
It would be a 2+ million pay-per-view night of business. Conor would make a ton of money. Islam would make a ton of money. The organization would make a ton of money. And most importantly, you would have a budding star just finishing the biggest star in your sport's history and sending him packing on his way to doing whatever it is that he's going to do next.
Right.
So don't think for a second that is not a possibility.
Oh, I definitely think that could happen. Now, we have to, of course, get Conor in a fight camp, get him booked with a fighter, and get him in the octagon one more time before we see that happen. But I agree with you. It could happen. We've seen crazier things happen, and none of the people that you named, from the debuting flyweight to Stipe, Khalil Roundtree, none of them have done anything close, even combined, to what Conor McGregor has done for the UFC, for mixed martial arts, for combat sports in general. So Conor McGregor, obviously has fallen on tough times lately as far as his fighting goes. But I certainly think if he's got a couple more left, we might as well make him the most ridiculous, extravagant fights ever, because, Conor McGregor's not going to go out on bottom. You're not going to see him fighting on a co-main event. You're not going to see him fighting on a feature bout. He's fighting 1 or 2 more times in main event slots, and that's it. And if that means you got to put a title on the line because he's the biggest star, he's probably not going to win the title. What are you going to put? He can't make 45. He wouldn't win that belt anyways, probably. He can make 55. He's not going to win that belt. He's damn sure not going to win the belt at 170. So just put him in there. If you don't like him, then you're going to love to see him get beat. If you do like him, then it's one more shot at the belt for Conor McGregor before he sets off on his next adventure.
It's going to be interesting. It's the only fight that has any chance of doing more than 2 million pay-per-view buys given the UFC's current roster.
Right. Well, and you look at the current roster. Let's talk about 5 years from now. There's not going to be John Jones. There's not going to be Alex Pereira probably. Not going to be Israel Adesanya.
No Conor.
No Conor.
No Volkanovski.
No Volkanovski probably. No Dustin Poirier. No Gaethje probably. No Covington.
Max Holloway will still be around.
Max will probably still be around. Yeah. There's a couple of guys, but man, we're not going to see all these guys. So the UFC really does have to rely on this next stable of fighters to become the budding stars of the future, because in 5 years, we don't have any of these guys anymore. A lot of these big stars are in their mid to late 30s, and they're kind of on their last on the last chapter of their fighting career. So yeah, the UFC definitely needs that. If it comes a time where they need to really put the business first and make a bunch of money, they're going to insert Conor in a title fight.
Yeah, I could definitely see it happening. Yeah. I want to finish up today on a really exciting fight that got announced.
Let's do it.
Both of these guys have something in common, and that was that they were both knocked out by Alex Pereira in their last fight.
Brutally.
We got Jamahal Hill versus Jiří Procházka.
Yeah. Still a great fight.
I like both of these guys, man. I'm a big fan. I think Jamahal Hill gets a lot of undue hate, if I'm being honest.
Well, real quick, not to cut you off, he was the Derek Lewis 2.0 of Instagram for a while. When he came on the scene, he got his belt quickly. People are like, hey, you got to watch Jamal's Instagram. It's like Derek Lewis, but it's wild. And now, he's kind of let his frustrations be known a little bit about his fight with Alex Pereira and the fact that he's not a champion anymore. And people are really quick to turn on him. They're like, oh, he's the most unlikable fighter in the UFC. Now I'm like, this guy was everybody's favorite not that long ago.
Yeah.
So I think Jamahal still deserves a lot of credit. And look, if we're talking about a fight, this is a good fight for Jamahal Hill.
This is going to be a banger.
This is ending in knockout for sure. Bet the house on it. But this is a good fight for Jamahal because Jiří keeps his hands down and Jamahal has that touch of death. He can really, really crack hard with his hands. And Jiří just is so susceptible to getting hit with big shots. And it's not just because his opponents throw heavy hands, but it's because he moves so much in all these directions that when they throw something and he happens to meet it, it does twice the damage and he's half to blame for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting when I looked at the odds for this, the opening odds. Jamal's actually a 1.5, or basically it's almost a pick 'em, but he's like a -150 favorite. So, basically you bet $150 to win back 100 is how that works. So, slight favorite for Jamahal Hill, but I think it's for good reason, and I think you brought up the reason why. It's because Jiří fights with his hands down. He fights a little reckless. Jamahal, if you look at a technician, all the technicians in the UFC, we just watched Petr Yan fight this weekend. Beautiful technique.
Right.
We've seen Alex Pereira recently go out there and implement just incredible technical masterpieces of a performance. John Jones looked great against Stipe. But Jamahal Hill is a guy who knows how to win fights. He's only lost a handful of fights, and they were to really good fighters.
Yep.
So, yes, he's not the most technical in the world, but he can crack.
Yep.
And he's very game. And if you go back to the Glover Teixeira fight, he took some shots in that fight. He was taken down. He got himself back up. Everybody knows Jamahal Hill's not a jiu-jitsu guy, and Glover Teixeira is, and he's a damn good one. And Jamahal Hill, he can find a way to win. Now, Alex shut the lights out, but he does that to everybody. So you can't really fault Jamahal Hill for that. So I think this is a really favorable matchup for Hill, and I might be tipping my hand as to which way my prediction is going to go. Certainly, Jiří can win the fight. But Jiří's, the way he fights and the way he kind of, keeps his hands down and rocks back and forth, I think with those really nice hooks, the uppercuts, the straights that Jamahal possesses with the real power that he does have, is going to create some problems for Jiří. I think Jiří, after his last fight, his loss to Alex for the second time, he said, I need to go make some improvements in my game, or I don't need to come back to fighting.
Wow.
So I'm really interested to see what improvements Jiří has made, because if he hasn't made any improvements, that makes Jamahal Hill actually a really bad opponent for him.
Oh, yeah.
Because Jamahal Hill only needs 1 or 2 good shots, just like Alex.
Yeah.
No, he's not the technician Alex is, but he's still over a 5-round period of time, which is going to be a 5-round co-main event, I believe. He's still got a lot of opportunities to find his shots, and he's not going away easy unless you put him out with, an Alex Pereira type of hook.
Right.
But Jiří does have that power too, but to me, this fight is really going to come down to what improvements has Jiří made since he promised us that he was going to show us some improvements.
Yeah.
Because I think you're going to kind of get the same Jamahal that you always get. He's going to show up, pop his mouthpiece in, bite down on it, and start scrapping. So if Jiří has made some technical improvements, then we could see it be a tough night for Jamahal. If he comes out there with his hands down and reckless, I think he's going to sleep.
Yeah, and I think we could see that out of Jiří. Now, both of them were knocked out in their last fight, so I'm eager to see if either one or both of them come out gun-shy and a little bit more timid in the first round before they get hit a little bit and they feel it and they remember they do have durability, and maybe that one shot off Alex Pereira, that's not going to define their career. That's not going to define their chin.
Getting knocked out by Alex doesn't mean you're not durable, by the way.
Right.
It just means you got knocked out by Alex.
Exactly. So, so I think that both guys have the ability to showcase some different skills. Now, if I'm in Jiří's corner, I'm telling him we need to take this fight to the ground, but the way we need to do it is tear the guy down from the bottom to the top. Jamahal Hill's not great at checking kicks. He doesn't really kick a lot himself. He will throw kicks from time to time, but it's nothing crazy. He's not going to, sit there all night and kick with you, but he'll throw them when the time's right. Jiří can throw really good kicks, and he does do a lot of damage with his low kicks. So I think if Jiří wants to get his hand raised in this fight, he does have to start to chop down the legs early of Jamahal Hill to bring some of that speed and ability to move out of Jamal's legs, so Jamahal becomes a little bit more of a stationary target. Jamahal, if he comes in timid, I'm worried because his chin does get a little bit high. But if he doesn't and he's able to stay pretty tight, he's going to find his shots on Jiří.
Yeah.
And that's why Jiří, again, needs to take this fight to the ground. If he's able to kick a little bit, engage in the striking a little bit, just enough to take Jamahal Hill to the ground, I think he finds a pretty easy submission. But Jamahal Hill, like I said, he hits so hard. And if Jiří's out there moving the way he was moving and he's not cautious or timid at all from his last knockout, which I kind of believe that's not going to be the case. He's going to go out there.
Jiří's going to Jiří.
Jiří's going to Jiří every single time. I think Jamahal will be a little bit more poised and timid at the beginning of the fight. Still think it's going to end in a knockout. But if it ends in a knockout, it's going Jamal's way. And if it ends in a submission, it's going Jiří's way. But at 205, I guess we're not really doing predictions right now.
This fight's still a month away.
I'm getting all excited, but okay. So
I can see the wheels turning in your brain. You're not on the hot seat to make a prediction.
No, so I won't make a prediction, but I think there's ways to win. Take the fight to the ground for Jiří and do some damage on all aspects of Jamal's body, head, body, and legs. And then for Jamahal, if I'm in his corner, I'm saying we need to work this boxing. We need to get crisp on getting on the inside, tear the body up. Don't worry about kicking so much. Focus on checking your kicks and then beating the kicks with your own combinations. That's how Jamahal gets his hand raised in these fights. Sometimes it doesn't look pretty, but he gets the job done, so it's effective. And that's a fun fight.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I think that's a perfect place to leave it for today. Yep. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you that celebrate. We are looking forward to having Thanksgiving with the family. And then, of course, next Sunday, we're going to be right back here in the studio producing some content to drop to you on Monday.
That's right.
Check out the Discord. Drop a like on this video and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.